You're tuned in to the Not Rude Honest podcast. My name is Nadia, and this is where I talk about all things life and tell the uncensored truth as I see it. Hi guys, welcome back to the Not Rude Honest podcast. It's a welcome back for me as well, because I've been gone so long. And yes, Happy New Year. I know we're in Feb. However, as you should know by now, I start my work life in Feb and I always take January off. Or at least I have done in the last couple of so years. So yeah, Happy New Year. Hope your year is starting well. And let's just get into it. I'm not going to make any excuses as to why I've been gone or whatever. I'll just starting anew. New year, new me and all that jazz. Yes, so today we're talking about survival mode. And this is a topic that is quite personal to me and also current for me. So, what is survival mode? The easiest and simplest way for me to explain it would be to say that your body reverts to essential functions only. There are many functions in your body that are not essential. Beneficial, yes, but not essential. So when your body goes into survival mode, for whatever reason, it reduces all that work down to just the essential functions. Survival mode is essential for us as human beings because we often go through things that require our body to know how to survive rather than thrive. And as such, the human body is a beautiful thing. It will adapt and allow us to basically survive through whatever that period is. But sometimes it's not a short-lived thing. It becomes a prolonged period of survival mode. Now, your body's not made to live in survival mode. It uses survival mode as a coping mechanism for a short space of time. So when you extend that time, and when I say you, your circumstances, whatever, causes that survival mode to be prolonged, there can be quite some detrimental consequences to living in that space. So let's assume your basic needs are met. And the basic needs for any human being is water, air, shelter, and food, right? So let's assume your basic needs are met. What then would put you in survival mode? And for the majority of people who have their basic needs met, survival mode is triggered by trauma. Trauma just sounds like such a big, hefty word, which it kind of is. But ultimately, any stressful experience can be traumatizing. And as such, can put you in survival mode. Trauma can be anything from a pandemic, like we've just experienced, and the effects of that. Something personal, like, the loss of a job or something threatening those basic needs, like your food or your shelter. Or things like grief, losing a loved one and the emotional impact that has on you. Those kind of things can also put you in survival mode. I found that there is a lot of material around survival mode, the causes, how to recognize that that's where you're at, but not a lot about what life looks like after you come out of survival mode. Ultimately, you don't choose to go into survival mode, you just end up in it. Whatever the trauma is occurs and your body immediately reacts. And you're kind of thrust into this space where you have no choice but to survive. And at some point, whatever it is that puts you in survival mode stops. And you do, in theory, automatically come out of survival mode. So your body is no longer relying on essential functions only. It now is in a space where it needs to thrive. And yet, in instances where you have had prolonged periods in survival mode, you will find that you've picked up certain habits as a result of being in that space that you now no longer need but may find it quite hard to break. And that's pretty much where I'm at right now with my survival mode journey. And that's why essentially I named this podcast episode Survival Mode Exit. Because when I was thrust into survival mode, it just happened. A series of events occurred and I was just thrust into this space where surviving is all I needed to focus on. And surviving was all I could do. And then my circumstances changed after a very prolonged period of time. I'm talking a matter of years here. And I picked up habits that allowed me to get through this very difficult time in my life. And when those circumstances started to change, I didn't know what to do with myself. I didn't know what it was like to not have to survive and to just thrive, to just exist, to just not be at such a heightened state of alert. And I don't find that there's a lot of documentation around that process. It's kind of this thing where, and they lived happily ever after. And they don't actually tell you what happily ever after actually looks like. They just tell you that that's what happened. And that's what I experienced. If you haven't already, subscribe to the Not Rude Honest podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and notrudehonest.com. To provide some context on what I'm talking about, I'll give you some examples of habits, I guess, that I picked up. Let me speak for myself. That I picked up as part of survival mode, which I happen to know are not limited to me. However, I'll speak for myself so I don't generalize or whatever. One thing was being reactive rather than proactive. That one crept up on me because I didn't even realize that that's where I was at. It was a conversation with someone that let me realize that I was actually reacting to everything that was happening rather than being proactive. And the reason is incredibly simple. I had no energy. I had no energy, no capacity to be proactive. And I was just in a space where as things were happening, I would react and react well to be able to survive the next step. There was no room in that to be proactive, to exert energy in thinking about what could be done based on what may happen. I could only cope with what was happening and getting through that. Another example is planning. Naturally, I'm a planner. I love a good schedule. But I did find that as I was going through survival mode, I couldn't even see as far ahead as next week. So I would only be able to plan about 24 hours ahead, and getting through those 24 hours was my main and only focus because every single day was difficult. Every single day brought different challenges of its own, which for me and in my experience was so dynamic in nature that I couldn't plan ahead. And I didn't even have the capacity to plan ahead because my plans kept getting thwarted. Prime example, and I'm sure a lot of you can relate, the pandemic, right? Every single day was a new tale as to what was happening or how bad things were or what we were or were not allowed to do. So I couldn't plan, oh yeah, do you know what? Next week, let's go out for dinner. Because the likelihood is by next week, we'll be on lockdown again. So just being able to get through the next 24 hours became the extent at which I could think and see into the future. Once I've come out of survival mode, now even I can tell you that I struggle to make plans that feel too far ahead. I'm not still on the 24-hour schedule, but if someone said to me, can you do this next month? Immediately my brain just goes blank. What do you mean next month? That just seems like an eternity away. And this is someone who planned years and years in advance, struggling to plan for the month ahead. Although I found it hard to, I guess, mentally come out of survival mode, one of the things I've struggled with is the fact that my body, aka physiologically, my body immediately stepped out of survival mode. And it's been a very weird experience because, again, with an example. So I have suffered from insomnia due to heightened stress for a few years now. And whenever I'm stressed, sleep goes out the window. Like, just forget about it. Sleep ain't happening. As a result of that, I'm quite severely sleep deprived. Although I don't feel it, I'm highly functioning. You probably wouldn't know unless I told you. However, I know it because I know, I have a whole ritual when it comes to going to bed and whatnot. And I found that when my stress levels dropped, which happened quite drastically, all I can do now is sleep. It's like my body is now in a space where it's like, I need to catch up on sleep. You have deprived me for so long. I'm going to take it whether you give it to me or not. And my body will shut itself down. It will literally say, good night, I'm out, and sleep. And the sleep is deep, and it has been amazing to sleep that well. But I do realize that it's not something I'm willing my body to do. My body is just doing it. And that's a prime example of physiologically coming out of survival mode and your body going back to a place where it can thrive and it can, take its time to do a bunch of stuff that you didn't have the luxury of before. So I find that where I have been ignoring a lot of my physiological needs, my body's now reclaiming their time. Another example is food. So while I've been going through this, heightened stressful period, I would rather use my time to, get things done than to sit down, prepare a meal, eat it, etc. Which has meant that I have A, lost a bunch of weight, and B, not been eating well at all, right? Now, my body is refusing to hear it. If I don't eat, I'm going to pass out. Okay, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but literally the hunger hits me on the hour, every hour, and I need to feed my body. Otherwise, it literally will not allow me to concentrate on anything else. During survival mode, I could go hours without eating and focus perfectly fine. Now it's like, you don't need all that energy anymore. Feed me now. On the flip side of that, because I wasn't eating as regularly, I wasn't cooking as much, right? I am someone who loves a home cooked meal. I cook every single meal 3 times a day, every day. And yet in the last 2 years, I've missed so many meals that cooking twice a day feels like a chore. It feels like, oh my goodness, I have been working hard. How have I made 2 meals today? And again, me having to remind myself I am no longer in a space where I need to use that time for something else. I can now go back to using that time to preparing my 3 meals a day and enjoying my 3 meals a day without stressing. And the adjustment that you think should be so easy because essentially it's a better quality of life has been incredibly difficult. I say all this to say that being in survival mode is incredibly difficult on both your mind and your body and your circumstances, right? It is a very hard thing to go through. And you'd think that coming out of survival mode should be easy breezy beautiful, But sometimes it's not. And that's okay. What I do think is important to note is that you need to recognize when you're no longer in survival mode. And you need to recognize that the habits and behaviors that you picked up and that were necessary during survival are no longer necessary. And that if you don't offload those behaviors in a timely manner, they can actually become self-sabotage. Again, using the food as an example, yes, there was a period of time when I did not have the luxury of preparing 3 meals a day and eating as much as I wanted and whatnot. I didn't have that luxury. I didn't have the time. The time was better used in other areas of my life to help me to get through what I was going through. However, now that I no longer require that time in that area, if I don't put that time into, again, preparing my meals and, everything else, I could end up continuing to deprive my body of nutrients that it requires, even though that deprivation is no longer necessary. Refusing to go back to planning ahead could result in me missing out on amazing opportunities that would actually overall better my life. So, yeah, although those things were needed to get through what I was going through, they are no longer needed. And me maintaining those bad habits could actually prove more harmful than helpful now that I no longer need them to survive. The overall point I'm making is this. There are many things in life that will put you in survival mode. And hopefully, the periods in which you need to survive are short-lived. But if they are prolonged and last a long time, you are likely to pick up a bunch of bad habits. You need to recognize when you're no longer in survival mode and put in the work to unlearn those bad habits so that you can go back to living your life. If you do not put in that work to unlearn those bad habits, which I do not believe will happen automatically, you actually need to put in the work, you will find that you're using survival techniques in periods where survival is not necessary, and that will actually be harmful to you. That's it. That's all I had to say. Thank you for joining me for this episode, and I will see you again in the next one, which is coming at you very soon. I promise I'm going to be a lot more regular this year. I have a lot in store for this podcast, so I'm excited about that. So until next time, as always, take care and be safe. Bye. Before you leave, subscribe at notrudehonest.com for the latest news and exclusive freebies. You can also find @notrudehonest on all your favorite social media platforms.